Bismillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are now continuing to study the principles and the processes that would allow me to make good decisions in my life, to make good choices in my life. And as we said in our first encounter, life is full and replete with choices, all kinds of options, all kinds of choices. And Islam does, as a holistic, natural, organic system of life, give us guidance about those principles and processes. Now we want to begin with the spiritual principles. So the first question, I think, is a very natural one. Why do we first begin with spiritual principles? Usually when we think of decisions, we would think of rational principles, instrumental principles about how to choose, how to weigh, how to evaluate. So why spiritual principles? Well, the first thing to be said, I think, is that human beings are a composite of different components. Human beings are a composite creation. We have a spiritual dimension, we have a rational, intellectual dimension, and we have a material dimension. We are not only matter, nor are we only mind, nor are we only spirit. And so, of course, our decisions must then optimize and integrate between all of these different dimensions of existence. If I make a decision which only considers my material welfare, it's going to be impartial. It's going to be partial. It's going to be unbalanced. And so my decisions must encompass my spiritual nature, my intellectual nature, and my material nature. Of those natures, of those dimensions of the human disposition and constitution, the spirit is paramount. The spirit is cardinal. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is now, when Allah ta'ala describes to us the earliest genesis of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, Allah ta'ala says, when we formed him and fashioned him, and then we breathed into him of our spirit, that spiritual dimension, we commanded the angels fall down prostrate to Adam. And so the ulama, when they look at this beautiful ayah, they say the angels were commanded to bow down to Adam because of his spirit, not because of his form. It was after Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam was imbued with a spiritual consciousness, a spiritual awareness, a spiritual essence that gave him value, that gave him stature, and that made him eligible to be the best and the peak of God's creation. And so the spirit is paramount, the spirit is cardinal. The poet says, عَلَيْكَ بِالرُّوحِ فَاسْتَكْمِلْ فَضَائِلَهَا فَأَنْتَ بِالرُّوحِ لَا بِالْجِسْمِ إِنسَانُ. The poet says, look after, take care of your ruh, of your spirit, and perfect its virtues, because by virtue of your spirit and not your form are you a human being. So the spirit, the spiritual nature, the spiritual essence of the human being is essential, is cardinal. And the spirit is what conditions, if you like, and defines and optimizes the other dimensions of my being. The soul endures, the spirit endures, the body does not. The mind we experience in life, it does not. As we get older, we become less sharp, less forgetful. As we become older, we become weak, we become feeble, we become subject to the vicissitudes of time, of life. But yet the soul endures. The soul, once created, lives forever, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed and decided. And so when we we must understand our intellectual existence, our material existence in the envelope, in the light of our spirit. And so our spirit defines, conditions, and indeed optimizes the welfare of the other dimensions of human existence. Now the second question: where are these spiritual principles? Very briefly, of course, the source of all our principles in Islam, and the source of the spiritual principles in particular, are from wahi, from revelation, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Be that revelation the Quran, be it a different type of revelation, which is the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. And it is also in the sources contained within the Quran and the sunnah, and we will expand on that as we look at the rational principles in Islam in future discussions. So these are the sources, and these principles have been extracted from these sources by shar'i reasoning. And shar'i reasoning, and we will see inshallah elements of that, shar'i reasoning at the linguistic level, at the hermeneutical level, at the rational level, at the intentional objectivist level, meaning the great maqasid, the great objectives to live a noble, free, happy life. Using these linguistic, rational, legislative principles, we extract the spiritual principles from the primary sources. And who does that? In essence, men who lived the perfect, optimal, you could say, a configuration of material life, of intellectual life, of spiritual life. Men and women, scholars, saints, who lived material life in the best possible way, who lived intellectual life, and who were the best and the brightest in the intellectual and rational field, and who were the most transparent and most beautiful of hearts in the spiritual dimension. So, in summary, our scholars, our saintly scholars, the ulama rabbaniyun, they are the ones who extracted these principles using shar'i reasoning from the primary sources. And in general, we could say that we find these principles beautifully embodied in the field, as we mentioned in our first discussion, in the field of tazkiyatun nafs. The third question: what are these principles? Now, there are many, many principles. So if we would summarize them into 6 or 7, we could say this. Let's group those 7 principles into 4 broad areas. One is the psychology of my existence, the psychology of myself. Who am I? What am I composed of? And how do those components relate to one another and interact to make me tick? So under this broad rubric of the psychology of me, of my existence, we're going to look at 4 building block principles. One is the qalb, which is the spiritual heart. 2, the nafs, the lower self. 3, the aql, the intellect. And 4, my senses, my external, essentially my words and my deeds. These 4 components of me, what are they and how do they connect with one another to make me tick? But also specifically, how do they come together to allow me to analyze, observe, choose, and decide. Number two, the aim, or shall we say, an essential aim of my existence, which is the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. Looking at the idea of what is freedom and what is happiness. Third, the source of my existence, which is of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the idea of tawheed, the idea of the unicity of the divine, and how that is the source of my existence in the spiritual realm, but specifically the idea of tawheed as an experience. That is not simply to know that Allah exists, that Allah is one in His essence, in His names and attributes, in His actions, but also the emotional experience of tawheed, to feel tawheed. And then lastly, the relationships of existence, my relationships with the creation of Allah, human and non-human. And that is essentially a discussion of akhlaq, the way in which my relationship with the divine at the experiential, emotional level, the way that is translated into beautiful virtue and character in me, and then expressed in the relationships of my existence with others. These would be the building blocks, if you like, of our spiritual principles to help us choose well and decide wisely. They are, at least for me, incredible. These are the building blocks to answer the greatest questions of human existence, the greatest questions in philosophy. They answer, for example, in an incredibly powerful way, in an incredibly lucid way, the questions about value in philosophy or axiology. What is value? What is valuable? The questions of the nature of existence and the nature of reality, metaphysics. They answer questions about cosmology, the nature of the universe. Questions in ontology, the nature of my being. They answer questions in ethics, good and bad, virtue and vice. They answer questions, yes, about political philosophy, about epistemology, about how do we learn. And they answer even questions about logic and how logic and reasoning work. And so we will now begin in the next few discussions to look at the psychology of the self, the aim of existence, the source of existence, and the relationships of existence, and to extract from them the spiritual principles which will allow me and you and us to choose well, to develop a map of how to think and how to reason, and to, inshallah, through those principles and the application of those principles, optimize my welfare at my spiritual level, at my intellectual level, and at my material level. وجزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.